Well, good evening. Good evening. Thank you all for coming out. This is kind of fun. I'm actually really glad that everyone's going to be here for this discussion. We might actually, if this works out well, which I think it will, maybe set up some other forums like this for us to kind of talk about some other issues. But thank you. Anyway, I'd like to welcome and introduce our first speaker, Will Vedrick. Tonight we're going to be discussing basically what happens now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. As Christians, we're obviously very grateful for this. And Will Vedrick, as many of you may already know, is an adoption lawyer, but he's also, I believe, the head or the chair, or what do you want to call the Christian?
The local president of the Christian Legal Society, Chattanooga Chapter.
There's a little switch on there. That's pretty helpful.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, there you are. There you are. But you are what?
Yeah, so I am the Chattanooga chapter president of the Christian Legal Society also. And so, we're a local group of attorneys that do try to mobilize for, different various issues, within the community or the Tennessee State Bar, as well.
Great.
So, yeah.
Well, I've invited Will, I've asked Will if you wouldn't mind to sort of explain a little bit about the history of the law, Roe v. Wade, and what has changed now with the Dobbs sort of overturning the Roe v. Wade on a national level, and what that means for us locally. We'll get a little bit more specific with Kelly in just a minute. We'll introduce her in just a few minutes. But I'd like to just pray and give thanks and then invite Will to come and speak. Holy Father, we thank you that you are good and that you've given us life. And we thank you for the lives of all who will now be saved as a result of the law that has changed. We do want to be wise stewards of what is taking place in front of our eyes, and we pray that you would give Will wisdom to communicate to us how to think rightly about this dicey topic. So we pray that you would rule and reign in our hearts tonight, send forth your Holy Spirit, and equip us to think rightly. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, good evening. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, yeah, so like Father Phil had said, my name is Will Vedrick. I am a member here and also a practicing attorney, and I practice primarily in the areas of adoption law. I represent adoptive parents. I represent birth parents. My law partner and I, Mike Jennings, he has practiced adoption law in this community for, over 35 years. Me, not so much. My hair is a little bit less gray, and I have hair. But I'm getting there. What I'd like to talk a little bit about tonight, and feel free to, ask questions, because I know some of this stuff is a bit confusing. And we'll start with a little bit of a civics lesson, and probably, those songs that we would grow up, the Schoolhouse Rock, they probably say it much more eloquently than I could. But what does the Supreme Court do? So, of course, the Dobbs decision is a decision by the United States Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court accepts cases on a case-by-case basis. They don't have to accept the cases that they do take. They may get appeals from the federal court system in the amounts of tens of thousands every year, and generally speaking, from year to year, they only accept about 90. It's usually somewhere in the 80 to 100 range. They spend a lot of time hearing these individual cases, and the idea is they let the decisions of the lower court stand for the most part, unless there is some sort of controversy. There's the federal district court, which is the trial court, and then the trial courts are then organized into federal circuits. And so there's the Court of Appeals, the Circuit Court of Appeals, and then if there is what's called a circuit split, where one circuit, which might be overseeing 7 states, and another circuit representing another 7 states. If there is a difference in how they interpret federal law, that's what we call a circuit split. And that's most often the case how the Supreme Court decides to hear a case. And when somebody appeals for what's called a writ of certiorari, they have to convince 4 of the judges, the justices, to accept and to hear that case. And so if not 4 of the justices are in agreement and they don't want to hear the case, whatever the lower court did, it's set in stone. That is the law. And so what we have here at the end of 2020, this case Dobbs, which comes out of the state of Mississippi, where the state of Mississippi instituted a ban on abortion after 15 weeks. The one abortion clinic, which was based in Jackson, then sued, and they sued in federal court. And so after a series of defeats, reversals, going back, it finally makes it up to the U.S. Supreme Court, where at least 4 of the justices, and we don't know who granted that writ of certiorari, but at least 4 of them did agree to hear the case. And so we have in our country, we have what we call a federal republic. And what that means is we have, on the one hand, we've got the national government, and then on the other hand, we've got a series of 50 state governments. And in some areas of the law, the national government is supreme. And in other areas of the law, the states are supreme. And so if it's a state issue dealing with, who is, renovating, the potholes on the state highway, well, that deals with state law, and so a federal court wouldn't have jurisdiction. And so you would sue in state court as opposed to the federal court to get a relief. Well, what we have with abortion law in the United States is this split of opinion. Up until 1973, which was when Roe versus Wade was decided, abortion had always been a state issue. At the time when Roe was decided, 30 states outlawed abortion totally. And so there was a minority of 20 states that were starting to open up and allow some types of abortion access. And so Jane Roe, which is a pseudonym, comes out of Texas, where Texas had said, you're not entitled to an abortion. And so she, through her lawyers, sued in federal court, and the federal court takes it all the way up after she lost at the lower levels. And then all of a sudden we have 7 of the 9 justices saying, well, not only do you have a right to abortion through the U.S. Constitution, but we have the ability to mandate what those rights do and do not include. And so famously, we all talk about pregnancy through the 3 trimesters, first, second, and third trimesters. Well, that comes out of the Roe decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Blackmun and the majority there, in order to help delineate between what the federal government could and couldn't do. They would say in the first trimester, the government has no ability or no interest in protecting the life of the unborn. And then as we get later in a pregnancy, well, all of a sudden, this fetus has a potential for life. And so the federal, the state government might have an interest in protecting that life. And so it created this what we might call unworkable dynamic between the federal government and the state governments. And that rocked along for quite some time in Chattanooga. Chattanooga got its abortion clinic in 1975, and from 1975 to the early 90s, probably about 35,000 abortions were performed in our city. And so in the early 90s, we had the federal Supreme Court decision of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which in some ways overturned and changed parts of how Roe worked, but then also affirmed it where it counted, so to speak. And so they did away with the trimester system and created a new test, which was even more difficult to work in practice, called an undue burden test. And so the idea would be is if the baby is not yet viable, in other words, if the baby was born, the baby wouldn't be able to survive. During that time, the states could, if they chose to, they could outlaw, or they could not outlaw an abortion. But once they reached a viable stage, which is a shifting target, based upon the medical technology at the time, then the state might have some ability to curtail, a woman's ability to choose whether or not to have an abortion. And so that was the law of the land for basically the last 50 years. And so in most states, there would be restrictions after some point in time. But in the first 20 or so weeks, there couldn't be any restriction to abortion because federal law said so. And so what we then have is the United States being one of about 7 countries, which includes also North Korea and China, allowing for abortions to happen after 20 weeks. There's only 7 countries in the world that allowed abortions after 20 weeks. And in fact, even in Europe today, most abortion laws will restrict abortion to the first 12 or 14 weeks. So the United States has really been really far out for a long time in terms of its allowing of abortion to occur. And so what we have in Dobbs is, again, it's that Mississippi law, which the Mississippi legislature knowingly said, after 15 weeks, you can't get an abortion. They knew, the legislature knew, that that was at odds with Roe and Casey. It slapped right into the face of federal law. So it's what we might call a case where it was teed up perfectly to go to the Supreme Court. That's why they did it. And so it finally makes its way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and there it took about a year or so to get a decision, but the court has issued its decision to say that there is not a federal right to abortion in the U.S. Constitution, contrary to what Casey and Roe have previously said. Now, of course, in Casey and Roe, they would say, through the 14th Amendment, we do have rights of privacy, and there's an expectation of privacy. And somewhere in that, even though the U.S. Constitution doesn't explicitly say that there's a right to an abortion, the justices extrapolated that, well, there must be one, because you have a right to privacy. You have the right to be free from searches and seizures. And of course, I would disagree with that. And so did the majority of the court here. And so it's a bit convoluted. The court, including its opinion, the 3 concurrences by other justices, plus the dissent, all of it is over 200 pages long. So it's an incredibly long opinion. But we'll kind of try to go through some of the differences here, what the opinion actually does and what it doesn't do. Because in the days after June 24, when that opinion came down, there was a lot of misunderstanding of what the Dobbs decision did. And so if you had asked a lot of people, they would have just said, well, abortion is abolished in the United States. There's no more Roe. And that would not be correct. That would be an incorrect understanding of Dobbs. But what Dobbs does is it says the U.S. Constitution doesn't provide a right to abortion, which means that it goes then back to the states. Just like before 1973, when Roe came down, it had been a state issue up until that time, where 30 states had not allowed any abortion at all, and 20 states allowed some in certain circumstances. But the idea is that this decision has gone back to the people and their representatives, instead of the majority of 9 people wearing robes to decide that. And so the opinion itself includes 5 of the 9 justices. Now, one other justice, the Chief Justice Roberts, also joined in the judgment of the court, but he didn't agree with their reasoning. And so he did not join the majority opinion, but he wrote a separate concurrence. And the other concurring justices took the reasoning of the opinion, but also went a step further. And so, for instance, Justice Clarence Thomas, he has always been, he was an appointee under Ronald Reagan, so he's been on the court a very long time. And he has always been an outspoken critic of what we call substantive due process. And so the substance of the law is very different from the due process under the law. One is procedural, one has to deal with the substance of the argument. But there's been a lot of recent laws passed in the 20th century that create this new category called substantive due process. It would be like saying, numbers and letters are different, but then saying, well, this number also serves as a letter, and it's very difficult to explain from a constitutional perspective, what that does and does not do. But there, in the opinion, they look to several different reasonings. They hold in a Supreme Court opinion what their ruling is, and then supposed to be the rest of the opinion itself. It deals with why they came to the conclusion that they did come to. So like the majority opinion, it's about 120 pages total. So the holding itself is only about 2 or 3 sentences. Then everything else is kind of showing their work, how they got to that point. And so I'll just read the holding itself. But the court held that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey are overruled, and the authority to regulate abortion is returned to the people and their elected representatives. So the critical question is whether the Constitution, properly understood, confers a right to obtain an abortion. And in Casey's controlling opinion, skipped over that question and reaffirmed Roe solely on the basis of stare decisis. Now, stare decisis is a Latin term meaning let the decision stand. And, we live in a common law country, which means we have judges who make law every time they enter an order. But then we also have a legislature that writes law. So we have 2 different kinds of law in the United States and in state court. Stare decisis generally says if this is the way we have been doing things, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's that principle. So if we've been doing things one way for a period of time, the assumption under the law is that we shouldn't do anything to change it. And so the dissent here makes the argument that, well, Roe and Casey have been around for 50 years. There will be kids now whose mothers and grandmothers relied upon their abortion rights under the law. And now all of a sudden, you're taking that right away from them. And so the dissent says we shouldn't touch it because it's been the law for 50 years. But the opinion of the court, through Justice Alito, who wrote the opinion, said, well, the court changes their mind when it needs to all throughout history. So a very famous case of where the court changed its mind after a period of time was after the court case of Plessy versus Ferguson. And that was a case that was decided back in 1896. And what Plessy says is that we can have separate but equal public spaces. So we have one accommodation for colored people, and we have another accommodation for whites. And so they can be separate, but they can be equal under the law. And so from that, we get the Jim Crow South, we get the Jim Crow North, we get all of this sense of, segregated schools. And that went on for about 60 years, even longer than Roe stood. And then we have through Brown versus Board of Education saying that actually separate but equal is not equal. And there's no protection under the U.S. Constitution to have these separate accommodations. Everybody as an American citizen has the right to equal protection under the laws, and it's not fair for one group to have really good accommodations, like a really nice water fountain, and then having a garden hose out here for another class of people. That's not right. And the U.S. Constitution doesn't afford you that right. Everybody is to be treated equal. So that is one instance where stare decisis was overturned because it was egregiously wrong. And that's the legal term there, that it was wrongly decided. Separate but equal was an unworkable, wrong decision. And so when things are egregiously wrongly decided, they can be overturned. And so that's what Alito says here, is that, yes, Roe and Casey have been around for this period of time. Everybody's mothers and grandmothers have relied upon this so-called right under the Constitution. But that doesn't change the fact that it was wrongly decided. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, to her credit, she passed away, a couple of years ago, but she also pointed out in one of her memoirs that Roe was wrongly decided. So as someone who was supportive of national abortion rights, how could someone who is supportive of national abortion rights believe that Roe was wrongly decided? Well, that's because she knew that there are separate state issues and there's separate national issues. And she knew, and she wasn't on the court when Roe was decided, but she knew that Roe, abortion rights had always been a state issue, and then the federal government, through the Supreme Court, superseded what had already been the place. There's enumerated powers under the U.S. Constitution, and the ability to control abortion was not one of those enumerated rights. And so that's how someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg could say, while I am supportive of abortion rights, Roe is really bad law. And sometimes we have a tendency to say, well, a law is constitutional. That means it's good. Or a law is unconstitutional. That means it's bad. But that's not really the case. Something could be unconstitutional, but good for the people. Or vice versa, something could be constitutional, but it doesn't make it right. And so there's powers there that just because the Constitution affords you that power or doesn't afford you that power, it doesn't mean that it's a good law or a bad law. Sometimes those overlap nicely, but that's not always the case. And so now Dobbs going forward, they expressly overruled Roe and Casey. So what that means is that state legislatures can now go back and, if the people of a certain state want to abolish abortion, full stop, the people of that state have the ability to do that. And so what we will have over the next couple of years is kind of a shifting of states that allow abortions and those that do not. So in states like, for instance, California, Massachusetts, Illinois, Georgia, these are states that are going to have abortion because the people of those states, they elect their legislatures, and the public opinion in those states are in favor of abortion. While we have other states like Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, these other states that are going to be more restrictive. So like in 2020, Tennessee passed a law which was sometimes called the heartbeat law. So if you can detect a heartbeat in the unborn child, you can't abort that child. And that happens generally around day 45 or 6 weeks. So that's very, very early, and also oftentimes sooner than a woman knows she's even pregnant. And so that law was passed in 2020, but it was written in such a way that it would be a trigger law. So if Roe was ever overturned, within 60 days, that law in Tennessee would take effect. And that's what Tennessee did. And so as of August 25, which will be 60 days after the Dobbs decision came down, in Tennessee, abortion will be illegal after 6 weeks or 45 days. And so we're about to see, I think, a great shift, in one direction or the other, where there will be, states like California where they've already started advertising in places like Tennessee saying, come here, we might even pay, accommodations for you to come get an abortion in our state. And so we're going to see a lot of that, and there's going to be lots of new case law on whether states can do that, or if they can't do that, can private companies encourage this kind of activity, but will state governments be prohibited from using public funds? So we're going to see I think a great shift here in the next couple of years, and the jury is still out, I think, on how a lot of that stuff is going to how to occur. But anyway, that is the state of the law. And again, there was a lot of misunderstanding about what the Dobbs decision did. Like, I have a lot of very intelligent friends on Facebook commenting about how, abortion is now abolished. Nobody can get an abortion in the United States. And that's just not true. It's a misunderstanding of what the law actually does and what the Dobbs decision ultimately did. And again, the key takeaway is it just returns that ability to legislate on these back to the states. And so the opinion of the court, that majority opinion, went into great detail, and it's very, very long. It's a public document. I do encourage you to read it. It is not written highly technical. It reads a bit like a story. But Justice Alito, writing for the majority, gets into, abortion has not been a long-standing right under the common law, which would include U.S. law, but then before the United States law, also English common law. And they go back to, the 13th century in the opinion, saying that even back then, abortion was criminalized. If somebody gave a potion to a woman to induce an abortion, that it would be considered murder, even in the 13th century. And of course, as Christians, we can go back, even in the Didache, which was maybe written in the 1st century. It prohibits Christians from participating in abortions, and it does call it murder. So this is not some sort of newfangled understanding here in the here and now. It's not just a cultural war issue, but this is an issue that we all as Christians should be able to come alongside with those people who are suffering, and they absolutely are. Like I said, Chattanooga has in many ways been blessed by not having an abortion clinic freestanding in our community. I talk with women who all the time, I could just go on and on with stories of women who, this one woman came to me about 2 years ago, and she is parenting her child now, but she was on her way to get an abortion at the closest clinic, which is in Atlanta. And when she got to Calhoun, she totaled her car in a horrible wreck. Now, if she had gotten an appointment here in Chattanooga, that little boy would not have been born alive. And because there was not a freestanding abortion clinic in our community, when she got in her wreck in Calhoun on her way to her appointment to abort that child, she was desperately afraid that she was miscarrying at the scene of the accident. And she prayed to God that he would save her child. And like I said, that boy is almost 2 years old. And it would have just been a horrible, horrible mistake. But anyway, that's about it for me. I guess we'll take questions maybe at the end, or what do you want to do? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. I'm sure that's roughly $500 on your hourly rate. Yeah? So we're good? We'll split it even. That's exactly right. Well, thank you very much. Just for the record, we're recording this, so if there was a couple, maybe sometimes some words and phrasing might be a bit tricky for some folks to follow. If you want to watch this again later, we're going to have it recorded, and I think we'll send out an email to everyone, just if you just want to maybe just reconsider some of this stuff. I'd like to invite Kelly up, please. Kelly, for those of you who don't know, this wonderful lady, is one of the directors over there at Choices Pregnancy Center, and I wanted to force you all to take these, but she's a lot nicer than I am. But these are some opportunities that we have to either volunteer or help them out. So I'm just going to pass these around for your consideration. Pardon me? Okay, well, we'll have more of that as well. But I just wanted to publicly say thank you to Kelly for coming and basically answering any questions that we may have, but also just speaking about, now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, what's more of a practical approach? We just got sort of an insight into the law, but what are we going to do now, and how can we support local ministries that are actually boots on the ground? And so thank you for what you do, and I'd like to give you the floor. So thank you very much. Oh, yeah, you need a mic. Yep, you do. So
well, it's in my, there you go. Talking a little bit about choices and who we are, because I'm not going to take for granted that everyone knows who we are and what we do. And I want to start with I've got my necklace caught in this thing. I want to start with talking about our history, because I'm just going to take the necklace off. That's easier than going through all this. Start with our history. Let me turn it off for a second. Well, maybe not. Our history of choices, because it is nothing short of miraculous, what God did at choices in what used to be what we call AAA women's services. And we, hang on, okay, I think we're getting that. We have a miraculous history. We've been in business or been in ministry for 35 years. So, Will said, there was Chattanooga Women's Clinic for years where 35,000 babies were aborted, and it was the only abortion clinic in town. So there was a group that got together called the Chattanooga Pro-Life Majority of Chattanooga, ProMac, and they would faithfully pray outside of that abortion clinic weekly, daily, and just asking God to miraculously close it. And that's during the time that AAA was formed, and had a small clinic right across the street from the abortion clinic. So there were two women who owned the Chattanooga Women's Clinic. They were partners, business partners, and so one of them got diagnosed with cancer, and she was dead within just a few months. So the ownership of the clinic went to the other partner, and she was diagnosed with cancer and was dead within a few months. And so the abortionist himself was going to try and purchase the clinic. And, unsuspecting, the pro-life group had no clue what was going on, but just knowing that they were just praying faithfully for God to close the doors of the clinic. And so the pro-life group got word on Friday that the clinic was going to auction on Monday. And so they just mobilized and started making phone calls and praying and raising every bit of money that they could raise over the weekend. And they went to they showed up in court on Monday to bid against the abortionist. And they were bidding in $5,000 increments on this, and they could see that he was just getting more frustrated and more frustrated. And so they had after they bid, what he did not realize was their last bid of the pro-life group. He stormed out of the courtroom, and they took possession that day and went in and just started. And it was a dark place, and they just started just tearing the place apart. And on the end now, where all of the abortions were performed, there's now what's called the National Memorial for the Unborn. And there's a huge granite wall where you can place a plate to memorialize aborted children. So if you guys have not been there, I would encourage you to go, because it's an amazing place. And anybody who says abortion doesn't hurt women and men and everybody else that has anything to do with it, just go stand in that room for a few minutes and you'll know that's a lie from Satan. And we know Satan himself is the architect of abortion. It's his idea, because God's the creator of life, and he hates anything God creates. He hates life. So that's why as Christians we have to be involved, because we have a biblical mandate to stand up, to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves. And so that's why we're there at Choices. So our mission is to, we empower men and women facing pregnancy decisions to pursue abundant life in Christ. So we don't want them to just choose life for their children. We want them to learn about the giver of life. We want them to meet Jesus, and we want them to learn what abundant life is for themselves. And so that's our mission there. So because we are a nonprofit, but we are not funded by the government. We're privately funded. So we are able to freely share the gospel every day, which is amazing privilege that we have. So just a little bit about what we do. We have a medical services side, and on that side we do all of our services are free to everyone who walks through our doors. So we do pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, options counseling, where we just sit with them and process through all of their options, because we recognize they have 3 options. They have parenting, they have adoption, and they have abortion. And so we're not there. Our job is not to talk anyone in or out of anything, but to just to be that confidential place where they can come and hear about their options and hear facts and truth about their options, because most of them are learning what they know about abortion on Google, and we know that's not true. So we are able to sit down with them and share accurate information on all of their options so that they can make an informed decision. And we are there for them, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by this, but we're there for them no matter what they choose. So we're not coercing them into anything, like, pregnancy centers get a really bad rap that we're trying to just force people into things, and we're not. We're just there to share the truth with them. So the ultrasound is a huge tool of what we do. If you can get those moms into that ultrasound room, our statistics locally are that 87% of them will change their minds. And we saw one on Friday, and it was the most miraculous thing, because there was a girl who came in, and we knew she was going to be very early, but she called Thursday, and she was desperate. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that the law that's changed it's not changing the crisis that people are in. It's not changing. If anything, it's making them even more desperate. It is. We're getting these calls because what we're doing now, when we have a phone call that's what we would call an abortion-minded or an abortion-determined woman, those calls are going to 2 people, either myself or another staff member, so we can track the calls that we're getting since Roe v. Wade was overturned. And so I took this call from this girl, and she knew she was pregnant. She didn't know who the father was, and she was very emotional. And we knew, based on the information that she gave us, that she was pretty early pregnant. And like Will mentioned, the 6-week mark, that's when you can detect that heartbeat. Like we really want them to be 6 weeks when they get that ultrasound, but because of just her desperation, and she kept saying, I can't wait till 6 weeks, I can't wait till 6 weeks, we knew we might only have one opportunity with her. So she came in, we did her pregnancy test, and it was positive, of course, so we did an ultrasound after, and we knew she was going to be early. So I went in with our sonographer, and they were scanning her, and it was very obvious that she was early, and she was less than 6 weeks, and we were like, oh man. But we just prayed. We went out in the hall and prayed that God would please let us see a heartbeat. Just please let us see that heartbeat. And she was less than 6 weeks. She was about 5.5 weeks, and it's the first time I've ever seen that, because at first you couldn't see anything, but about halfway through that ultrasound, we start seeing this little flicker. And it was this. Think about how miraculous that is. At 6 weeks or less than 6 weeks, that baby is the size of a grain of rice. And you can see that little heart just flickering. And it was nothing short of just a miracle right before our eyes. We see it every day. So she saw the heartbeat, and it moved her. And we saw her whole demeanor just transform. She hasn't verbalized a decision yet, but she left there changed. She did. And so it's a privilege for us to see that every single day. And so every woman that comes in that brings the father of the baby with them, these guys are getting engaged too by a male, by one of our male volunteers or staff. And they're being told that she needs him to step up instead of being indifferent about what decision she makes, or instead of pressuring her or whatever the case is, just to kind of separate the two of them and be able to engage with him and speak some truth to him is huge. So we also do STI, STD treatment, testing and treatment, which is important because if you have an abortion with some of these STI or STDs, it can cause a lot of complications too. So, but I want to tell you about the most exciting program that we're about to start really quick. And we've already seen a couple of these patients that have just called, but there's a new program called Abortion Pill Reversal. So most people don't realize that the abortion pill is not just one pill, it's actually 2 pills. And so the first pill you take it's a progesterone blocker, which progesterone is necessary to sustain a pregnancy. So just being blunt, the first pill kills the baby. And then you wait 24 to 48 hours, usually 48, and you take the second pill and it starts contractions. And so But if you take the first pill and you change your mind before taking the second pill, there's a good possibility that it can be reversed. And so we're starting that program where they can reach out to us after that first pill has been taken, and we can immediately just get them in there and start progesterone therapy. And that pregnancy there's a 67% chance that it can be saved, which is amazing statistics. And so we've already seen 2 of those patients without even advertising, because there's like a national hotline that they can call and they'll point them to their local center. So we're really excited about that, to be able to offer that. And then for those who do choose to parent, we have a program on our family services side called Earn While You Learn. And that program is amazing in a lot of ways. First of all, because one of the biggest obstacles that we see to people believing that they can parent is financial issues. They don't believe that they can do it financially. We see that all the time. So we're able to tell them about a program that we have that if they can go through our parenting program, and they're not only earning just valuable skills in being a parent, and they're getting to meet with a mentor once every 2 weeks, and it's for men and women. But as they're learning, they're earning what we call points or baby bucks to shop in our baby boutique that's stocked with brand new things. And so they're able to earn everything from formula and diapers to car seats and cribs. So if they go through our whole program from the time they find out they're pregnant up until they're a year old, the child's a year old, they can earn everything they need without having to buy anything. And so that is fully stocked by volunteers and churches. We have, local radio stations that do a baby shower for us every year to stock that. And so God just faithfully keeps that stocked. And I've seen that actually change people's minds when they realize that they can get everything that they need for that baby. So we're really excited about that program. And that's one of the ways that I wanted to talk to you guys about of how you could get involved. Because, like I said, we're seeing that we're seeing a lot of desperation, and we're seeing that it's getting harder and harder for these women to obtain abortion. And but it's also been a good opportunity to talk to them about why there's a 6-week ban. Let's talk about why that is, because there's a heartbeat. But actually, the heart starts beating 18 to 21 days after conception. You just can't detect it and see it on the ultrasound until that 6-week mark, which is just amazing to me. So we're able to have that conversation with them, and it's been some good conversation. But for those who are, some people don't have the capability to get in their car and drive 4 states over to have an abortion. But the sad thing is, and one way that we really need to pray is abortion is becoming a lot more accessible without having to walk in a clinic, because it's available. You can order pills. You can order the abortion pill online now. You can get it through telemed without even having to walk in a clinic. And that's dangerous on a lot of levels. First of all, you can lie about how far along you are, because it's only FDA approved up until 10 weeks, and then it starts losing its effectiveness. Well, what if you just call them and tell them that you're 8 weeks when you're really 20? I mean, women are getting that desperate. I'm hearing of women stocking up on the abortion pill online, even though they're not even pregnant. And I'm hearing of people who you talked about funding abortions. I mean, we're hearing of people who will actually go and get the pills for people in a state where it is legal and be like a runner to bring it to them in the state where it is illegal. I mean, there's just so much sketchy stuff. But you think about how dangerous it is to lie, to not get the ultrasound, because we have to rule out. We had a girl the other day who already had an appointment at an abortion clinic, but she had an ectopic pregnancy, which could be fatal if you don't detect that. So they're not getting ultrasound. They're not getting blood typed, because the Rh negative factor in the blood. I'm Rh negative, so every time I had a baby, I had to get a shot to protect the next pregnancy, to protect my blood from attacking that baby's blood. So there's so many reasons why it's dangerous. But then you think about these abortion pills that are coming from India, and you think about the fentanyl problem we have right now, and all the things, people that are dying from drugs being bought online. Just so many things that are wrong with that. But we really need to pray about that because it's just becoming way more accessible. So think about this. The statistics were that, and I'm going to get to my area of ministry for just a second. The statistics were that used to be that 1 in 4 women have had an abortion by the age of 45, and 50% of those have had more than one. So you think about a fourth of the population of any given group of people that you're in. It's staggering, but it's already now gone to 1 in 3, and it's just going to get higher and higher because of the accessibility and all of the things that are being ordered online and abortion pills online. Those statistics aren't even being tracked. So it's staggering. And so we also have a program that I direct called After Abortion Support, because we have to recognize a lot of the women are going to walk out of our doors and they're going to abort. And we know that they're going to have emotional issues. We can't say everyone is, but we know a good majority of those women and men are going to struggle. And so I don't have time to go into my story, but I will just tell you just the power of how God heals and uses the program, because I've been involved in Choices since the early 2000s. So I first came to Choices, it was AAA back then, as a very, very broken woman who had an abortion at 18 at Chattanooga Women's Clinic. So I was one of those 35,000, and wasn't a Christian at the time, wasn't raised in a Christian home, and long story short, I went through 10 years of self-destructive behavior, trying to forget about it and trying to self-medicate, and until finally I couldn't do it anymore. And I had become a Christian, but I still was having a hard time surrendering that to God and trusting Him for His forgiveness and healing and forgiving myself. But I finally started talking about it, because it's kind of like, I've heard it described as trying to hold a beach ball under the water. You can do it for a while, but it's going to come up, and it's going to come up really big, and it did. And so, but I couldn't even drive down the street of Vance Road or that side of the town even without just being an emotional wreck. So I came to Choices, went through our program, went through a healing Bible study written for women who have had an abortion. And God not only healed me, but that healing was so powerful that I ended up working in the same building where I aborted my child and helping women, because Choices had moved into the former abortion clinic. Up until a year and a half ago, that's where we were, which is an amazing story. But God heals and He forgives, and I'm so thankful for that, and I'm living testimony of that. And so I now see all the women who come in who have had an abortion and are seeking healing, and we're able to point them to healing, whether it's through one-on-one with me or whether it's in a support group or a Bible study. So we have to be there for them no matter what they choose. But how this could look for your church, and that's kind of where I want to finish up. There are a lot of ways. First of all, we need a lot of volunteers. I think we are running, because we're a staff member of 16, and we can only do so much. So we depend on our volunteers. I think we're on about 50 to 60 volunteers right now, and we need 100 to run at full capacity. So when we're low on volunteers, it's just putting more stress on the staff, just to be honest. But God always provides. He does, and we lost some volunteers through COVID. We lose volunteers in the summer because we have a lot of young moms with kids in school, but we have so many opportunities. We have opportunities on our medical services side where either we need receptionists, and those aren't answering the phone, but they're checking in patients and just being that first person, that warm person that they see when they walk in the door, and getting their paperwork and getting them in a room. And then we need patient advocates who are actually sitting with them in that room and doing that options counseling and walking them through that process, and just being that safe place for them to process where maybe they haven't had that. We need men to do that same thing as well. And then on our family services side, which is where we have really great need right now, is that opportunity to just take that person from the beginning and just mentor them every 2 weeks, meet with them. It's just a bigger opportunity to form relationships. And I have a girl right now that I'm walking through with that I started with her on her pregnancy test, and now she's about to deliver, and she actually wants me to be in there for the labor. I don't know if that's going to work out or not, but I mean, we have just bonded just like that. I mean, you just have that opportunity to just minister to them and just love them. And like I said, they can stay in that program until the child's a year old. So we need those in-center volunteers. But you know what we really need? Because we try really hard to connect our clients with churches. But you know, it's hard. I've been in church for 30 years now, and it's hard for me to walk in a new church. It's hard. And I've walked in some that didn't even acknowledge my existence when I walked in the door. This church is amazing. Let me just tell y'all for a second. Y'all have already got that part. Y'all have already nailed that part. Just the hospitality that you showed Noah when he walked through these doors. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. That's why I came, because I was like, I need to meet these people. Because the way you guys, you know, he and I were both just not in a great place and hadn't really had to look for a church in years. And I don't even know how he ended up here, but he would come home and tell me about you guys. And I was just like, man, this place is amazing. This place has got it right, the hospitality, in the hospitality area. And so that's why I started coming to visit with him. So first of all, I want to thank you guys for loving my son when he needed it the most. But second of all, what a gift. And we would love, our dream at Choices is to not just tell somebody, hey, you need to go over to Anglican Church of the Redeemer, but to have that relationship with a church where we can safely hand them off, maybe to a liaison or something that they're going to maybe come to the center and meet them first. Make that transition a lot less intimidating to walk through the churches, because we know we can send them, we can tell them to come here. What are the odds that they're going to actually show up? Not very much, not very big. So if we had that kind of relationship where we could know that we could safely hand that person off and they are going to be loved and they are going to be mentored. But we even have opportunities. Like I said, our Earn While You Learn program is only up to a year old. But what if we had some churches who wanted to extend that to 2 years old? Or what if we had some churches that wanted to offer that program, maybe just a handful of people, but maybe for those who aren't first-time parents, but they really still need that support and those material goods, where they could maybe in a church do the program, do the Earn While You Learn program, and then come and still shop at Choices. What if we had that kind of relationship with churches? That's our dream. That's our dream, to not just send people out and send them to a church, but to have that such a good relationship that we just hand them off. There are a lot of ways, but you guys, I've already seen your hospitality in action, and it's been amazing for me to see, because it's not like that everywhere. I can tell you, like I said, I've walked in some places and they didn't even look my way to acknowledge that they'd never seen me before. So what you guys have here is special, and I know it feels leadership, and it's just amazing. So that's just some of the things to pray about, because I think we're going to have more people. We're going to have more women and men who are forced to parent. We are. They're not. Everyone's not going to, with the accessibility of, because Tennessee will eventually go to a total ban, and a lot of our surrounding states are tightening up too. They're just going to have to travel more and more to get the abortions that they're seeking. And so there are some that aren't going to be able to. And so we've got to figure out how we can come alongside them and help them parent. That may be practically. That may be helping with utilities and rent. That may be helping with, one of the biggest obstacles I see is people don't want to have another child because they can't afford the daycare and the child care that they for the children that they have now. So we're seeing a lot of that. So I think we're going to have to do a lot of more practical things. And we already have seen our Earn While You Learn program before Roe v. Wade. It's already grown by 156% in 1 year. And so it's only continue. It's going to grow more and more as we have to learn to support these moms and dads in any way that we can. to be able to parent, to be able to support them in choosing to parent. Because you know what? No little girl ever grew up saying, man, when I grow up, I want to have an abortion. They don't. They're desperate. They're terrified. They're scared. And I've heard it compared to like an animal with their leg caught in a trap who will chew off their own leg just to escape. And that's exactly what abortion looks like to a woman. They're terrified. And we're trying to teach them to separate those emotions, to be able, because I tell women every day, don't make a permanent decision based on temporary emotion. But when they come in, all they can see is that fear and that desperation. But if we have better options for them, if they know they're going to be loved and they're going to be supported, because a lot of these women come in, they don't have a single person to support them. We're the only people that they've talked to or that they have to talk to. Or if they do have any people, they're being pressured constantly to abort. So as a church and as the church, we have to figure out what that's going to look like practically to love them and to empower them to make that parenting decision and adoption. I mean, what a beautiful option. And we talk to every single person about that. And I know Will and I have texted some, because if someone is interested in exploring that option, we'll have them come to us because they're already familiar with us and they're already comfortable there. So we want to we always present adoption, and it's just hard to get people on board with that, sadly. But it's one of the most selfless choices a person can ever make. So we want abortion to become not just illegal, but we want it to become unthinkable. Just unthinkable. I mean, how do we get to this place anyway, as a country? How do we get to this place where we celebrate women destroying their children? It's satanic. And also pray for us as a staff, because we're on the front lines, and the spiritual battle is real and we feel it. We have to have 24-hour security right now post Roe v. Wade because of threats and because of things that have happened at other places, and been threatened that they will follow us home and, harass us at our homes. So we have to have 24/7 security now. So please pray for us as well. And we appreciate your support. Probably out of all of our support, 15% is from churches. That's it. 15% of our financial support is churches. The rest is private donors. And that's sad too. But God provides. He provides, and He has for years, and He will continue to provide. But thank you guys for your passion for life and your burden for life and for supporting us. Does anybody have questions? And some of these might be for Will, so you can get in on this too. Yes, sir.
First of all, I'm sure people feel as blessed as I do for you to be here. Thank you very much. Is it part of your agenda to go to other churches? I mean, the fact that you came to us is a blessing to us, but I think it could be to other churches too. And you broaden your support that way. Between Father Phil and Father Jared, Father David, all of the other clergy that we have here, we've got connections all over the Southeast.
Yeah.
Is that something that you can do?
Oh, we're constantly seeking to get in churches because we, first of all, not every church in Chattanooga is a pro-life church, which to me is an oxymoron and should not even be in the same sentence. A pro-choice church. We're constantly seeking to form those relationships and get in and present the ministry. Yeah. So, we'll take referrals. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
It seems to me that the attitude in the world right now is do whatever you want. And don't worry about the consequences because there's something out there. Would an easier access to birth control help the situation? And also teaching abstinence to our children. Don't do it if you're not prepared to get pregnant.
Right. Yeah. I'll start with the second question. We've been teaching that since day one, abstinence. It's a challenge. Well, we don't go into schools and teach abstinence because we have a whole other organization in town that does that. They actually were birthed out of Choices, out of AAA. But we do, of course, advocate for that for everyone who comes in the door. The sad part is most people's eyes glass over when you start talking about that, and you know they're not going to hear you. And we're talking generational curse. People are just acting the way they were taught to act. And so, but we still, every time, advocate for abstinence, of course. As far as your first question goes, that's highly controversial. Choices does not, I might have my own opinion on that. Choices does not, we don't counsel or advocate for birth control just because it's very controversial because some birth control are abortifacients. So they do cause that fertilized egg to die. So it's very controversial, but I get your point, and I do believe that there are a lot of times where that would be, because especially for those that we see who just seem to be using abortion as birth control. I've seen married couples do that. And so, yeah. It's highly controversial, but it's also something that is constantly being revisited and discussed even at board meetings. So we're really thinking and praying through that for sure. Yes, ma'am. I hear the same thing every day. I could never carry a baby for that long and then give it away. And that's where we have to work really hard on our, just the way we even talk about adoption, because I will say, you back your car up at Goodwill with your old clothes and give those away. But that's not what adoption is. Adoption is making a beautiful plan for your child to have a life, a great life with people who can love, and you can probably speak even better on this, Will, but just to try to get them out of that mindset that it's just giving a baby away like you do your old clothes, and just because I would say 90% of the time we get shut down on that option.
Yeah, I definitely think that adoption, I think it's significantly more traumatic. Mm-hmm. It's the harder path, and that's why I think a lot of people will choose abortion, because it's easier than going through the trauma of an adoption. For instance, like I'm going to court tomorrow in a situation where it's going to be a horribly traumatic experience for this woman to make an adoptive plan, and it would be so much easier for it to all go away. 8 weeks into a pregnancy. And, I think a lot of times, it's easier to say, I would, and this is very selfish, but this is the way a lot of us think, is, I would rather my child not exist at all than to know that they're out there in the world.
Yeah. Well, and you have to remember, too, that a lot of people are not wanting anyone to know they're pregnant at all. So if you're going to carry a baby to term, then that's going to be discovered. And so, and I look everyone dead in the eye and I say, you know what? Here's where we are. No matter, you have 3 decisions ahead of you, and they're all going to be hard. But you got to choose your hard. And the decision that you're about to make is life-changing. It's life or death. And you have to decide right now which one you're going to be able to most live with for the rest of your life. I mean, any decision that we're making should be one that, one of our goals should be to make the decision that is going to cause us the least amount of regret. Are you going to regret taking the life of your child more than you are knowing that you have a child out there who is living and with a family who could give them the love and care that you could not give them? And so these are hard conversations that we have to have every single day. But yeah, there's a stigma with adoption that we try our best to overcome if they will even allow us to have that conversation with them. It's tough. Yes. Mm-hmm. A lot of insurances do. And we're hearing of companies now. I know of one sporting goods store that's paying their employees $3,000 right now to have an abortion if they, whatever they need to cover. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are a lot of companies that will cover abortion, insurance companies, sadly. Any other questions for myself or Will?
Have you noticed an increased spotlight or criticism of pregnancy centers?
Oh, yeah. We were watching a couple in our staff meeting the other day. There are some national hit pieces. Of course, the national, liberal news, one-sided, lots of hit pieces on and we're seeing it too, lots of what we call plants or fake clients, people coming in and, acting like they're a client when they're really not, trying to catch you doing something wrong. And we say, come on in, because we don't do any, I treat every client as though they're a plant, because I don't have anything to hide. So that doesn't intimidate me, and that's how we train our volunteers too. But sadly, they have gone in and caught a couple of centers doing some really sketchy, having some really not appropriate conversations, and so that's all you're going to see on the news. And so yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of those reports and news articles and TV, news reports. Lots of criticism, and there's a lot of attack. There are centers in America that have been firebombed and vandalized. Thank goodness we haven't seen anything like that, just because I think God is He's just protecting us. He always has. He's had his hand on this city, like you said. I mean, for the longest, I don't know that it's still the case, but for the longest, we were the largest city in America without a freestanding abortion clinic. So it's just nothing short of miraculous. Huge. There was one that tried to come to town a few years ago, and he got ran out of town. He already had, remember the Yellow Pages? He already had an article and an ad in there, and he already had his building, and he was ran out of town. So that was cool. Anybody else?
This could be for either of you. Sorry.
That's okay.
Something that I think I hear from my peers a lot is, I don't think it's the fear mongering, but I think there's a concern that it's more than just a clinic or, a women's health center or Planned Parenthood or anything like that. They're concerned about all the other medical concerns. There's a lot of concern that it's all hospitals everywhere, right? And I think we've established, like you said earlier, that a lot of stuff is state by state, a lot of stuff is more nuanced than people are saying. But what are you able to say to people who are asking, because they're coming to you for help, but at the same time, we also have to have conversations with our peers who are asking these same questions about us, to say, like, this is, this and that are not the same thing as each other, or you're providing a counsel service. I want to be able to relate better to my peers who are asking these questions, say, how can you support something here? And I say, well, I think the picture is bigger than you're painting it, but sometimes I get caught, but I don't really know what to say in these situations. So I mean, it's partly a legal question, but also really just like how can you love those people, and how can you actively show love to someone? Not that I'm like presenting a person, I just don't know how to speak.
Yeah.
What's a good thing to say, or how can I relate to the person in a good way?
Yeah. Sure. Do you have anything first, and then I can go, or?
Yeah, it's it's a tough place to start from. These women, they feel oftentimes rejection from everyone around them. And at the same time, there's almost a sense of, I'm hating myself for also rejecting, this child as well. And it's adoption can be a really good thing when it works really well. Adoptions are not the same thing as they were, 100 years ago, where you'd have like a nameless, faceless agency. And so, like, in my practice, very frequently, there's, ongoing contact post-birth, between, a birth parent and adoptive parents. And in trying to make sure that, that not only is your child loved, but we also love you. We want to, give you this ongoing contact. There's, like in the legal world, you can pay, actual and necessary living expenses for a woman who, well, maybe in her third trimester, she can't work. And so, there's ways that we as Christians can demonstrate our love, to these people that are absolutely hurting on the adoption side. But then also what Choices does, I think is just so important, that post-birth care, and, being able to see that these people actually love me. And they are going through all of these steps. This is, we know you're going through something that is, so difficult that many of us, fortunately, will never go through. But at the same time, it's difficult to be Christ to those people, but you can do that, through this process. I don't know if that answers, what your question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would say the same thing, just love and compassion and no judgment. Because they come to us, I think, a lot of times expecting judgment. And it goes a long way when they're shown the love of God instead. And we can sit across from them and tell them, we're not here to judge you no matter what we're just here to sit with you and love you. And we're here for you no matter what decision you make. And, it's a whole other thing getting into the life of the mother, because that's a whole other thing. And you really, there are situations where the life of the mother, I've seen a real life example of that from one of our staff members' families before. But that's very rare, especially when you're getting into, and we would say that's between the doctor and their patient. But when you get into partial birth abortion, where a child is being killed right before birth, and they've been viable for weeks and weeks, there is no reason to abort that child. I mean, you just have to very lovingly have those conversations. But also, we have to be really careful in how we talk to people, because when I just shared with you the statistics of people who are post-abortive, and a post-abortive man or woman is going to hear and expect condemnation. But we have to always assume when we're talking about this subject that there are post-abortive people in the room listening, and also use language that is loving and reminding them that there is healing and there's hope and there's forgiveness. It's not the one sin that God won't forgive. And so just learning to talk to people. And my experience has been, you have with a lot of people who are very angrily pro-choice, my experience has been that they are post-abortive and they're just trying really hard to convince themselves that what they did was okay. I mean, I've seen that over and over. So just loving them. They're not the enemy. We have an enemy. They're not the enemy. But we have an enemy of our souls who's at work behind the scenes. And so we have to remember, even Planned Parenthood is not the enemy. And love and pray for them as well. But yeah, I would say just anytime you're having a conversation like that, just, do it with just love and mercy and compassion. And you have people you're dealing with and you need advice, call the center. Because there are always people there who are willing to just kind of walk through that with you and talk through that. Those are hard conversations to have, for sure. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Yes.
I've seen a lot of concern about protection for treatment for miscarriages and ectopic pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Now that the decision was made, so
Right.
I imagine that has something to do with state laws. But
Yeah.
is there any validity to that in Tennessee or in other states?
So, like, for instance, for the treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is not defined as abortion. An abortion is an intentional killing of a fetus, for the purposes of ending a pregnancy. there's been a lot of people saying, well, now, women are not going to be able to get the health care that they need, that life-saving treatment. And of course, state law, and state law is different from state to state. So there could be 50 different state laws, but to my knowledge, there's not a single state which presently is even discussing like criminalizing treatment for an ectopic pregnancy or a miscarriage. When somebody miscarries a child, that child is deceased. That child is no longer living. And so the procedures of, typically, the body will expel, the baby at that point. That's not always the case. And sometimes there would be medical procedures that you would need to go to a hospital for, to basically be cleaned out. But that's not an abortion. In that situation, you are dealing with a baby that has already died of natural causes. That's not an abortion at all.
No, it's propaganda.
Yeah.
Is what it is. We talked about that with our nurse practitioner in our last staff meeting, and she just verbalized that with us. That it's really just sad that that's what's being used. But a child that's in a fallopian tube is not going to be viable. It's not going to live. It's impossible. And then the life of the mother could also be in danger. And so, we've seen that going around. We've seen that criticism, but it's absolutely, there's no validity to it.
And the definitions of words are very important. How we define things and how we use words. And, just this past week, Planned Parenthood changed their website to describe the treatment of an ectopic pregnancy as an abortion now. So there is a deliberate attempt in trying to shift how we use words. And when you shift the definitions of words, it's a way of actually controlling how people think. And so, they are trying to shift the conversation to make people think that, well, now I'm not going to be able to get the life-saving treatment that I need, for if I, God forbid, had an ectopic, pregnancy. And it's deliberate and like what we might call disinformation, something where it's false information that is told to the public to get them to believe something that is not true.
Absolutely, yes.
So as far as I'm aware, legally, in the various states that are now starting to criminalize like abortionists, like the doctors, there's not any state that is criminalizing a woman's participation in that process.
And we haven't seen or heard anything we haven't had any of that mentioned to us from anyone.
I think right now, access to that kind of abortive care is so common. There's the coat hanger stuff again. I think it's a bit of disinformation, trying to scare people because that is something that could happen. That is something that could happen, in desperation. People make poor decisions, but at the same time, and we want to be careful in loving these people because they are absolutely hurting. They're absolutely hurting. But at the same time, two wrongs don't make a right. And so, we want to be careful, not to just say, okay, well, you have to get, uninhibited access to abortion because you might harm yourself otherwise. At the same time, we don't want to allow the killing of an innocent life just because of these various other issues at play. I know that's difficult to.
Well said.
Can I ask, please? I love offering the adoption option. But you hear so many of your friends' children who are going through that process and it costs $40,000 or they have to go to another country. Are they all expensive?
So the short answer is no. There's many different kinds. And so like, for instance, the ones where you hear, $50,000. Well, generally speaking, those are agency fees. And agency fees go to really good care in many cases. They are there, as a business, but many of them are nonprofit. And so, the agency fee for doing an adoption, like let's say it might be $50,000. Well, that includes the maybe the price of paying rent for a woman for 3 months. It pays the cost of a pregnancy counselor. It pays for maybe the termination of parental rights of the birth father. So maybe he has to be terminated in court. There's different things that can be at play, but at the same time, there's not every adoption is an agency adoption. And so, there are different ways where birth parents can meet people looking to adopt online. That's how those connections are made nowadays. Where you might hire a lawyer for the birth mother, and the adoptive parents would have an attorney as well. And the fees in those kind of situations are not those exorbitant. You may be able to do an interstate adoption. Say a baby's born in Tennessee, going into a home of a North Carolina couple. You might be able to do that start to finish in a couple of $1,000s. At the same time, there's also adoption tax credits. So any fees that you pay, you can be eligible for getting that money back on the back end. And then at the same time, there's a public agency adoption. So like in Tennessee, DCS foster care. You can foster to adopt. Those kids are not always infants. Sometimes they're older. But at the same time, in those, there's no cost to the adoptive parents. In fact, the state will pay you an adoption subsidy until that child turns 18. And it's not a small amount of money either. They may be paying you several $100s each month for the care of that child until they turn 18. So, while yes, there can be very expensive international or agency adoptions, if you can't afford those kind of situations, there are other public options for the state foster care where literally it costs you nothing and they actually pay you to adopt.
Anybody else? All right.
All right.
Pray that you continue to protect
I mean, and it really hasn't. And now, for the most part, I'm just kind of going back to the way things were. The sky's not falling. It's like, it's not, on the one hand, it's not a huge victory, but on the other side, it's not a defeat. I get those people.
That was good.
Yeah, right now in Tennessee, there's a Tennessee. In Tennessee, yes. Well, like I did an auction last week in 17 state area. This is a 17. The rights have been surrendered. He's been legally free in the world. Yeah, so like, we get, I always tell people, if you find a violent situation, you find one incident. Well, we know who does interstate adoptions in Seattle. And so, there's a group called the Adoption Attorneys. And so, in order to get the competent lawyers who know how to deal with interstate and all that stuff, we always tell them, get the expert, and you won't have to pay somebody to fix some of that.
The one you got from Chief.
And
That's how I was going to say, because I'm from Margarita.
Right. Okay, yeah, we generally speaking, Catoosa and Walker, they're about as far as we go, but every once in a while we go to took some Georgia surrenders last week for so we got or the surrenders are irrevocable. We'll just handle it. Keep it down to the law. Knows what they're doing. So I went to UT and graduated in 2016, and then who was also my father. So that's how I